morning.
Morning.
Welcome everyone. It's nice to have you here in the morning with this beautiful sunny day. But it's really nice to have you all here so we can always learn a little bit more. We can spend a little bit more time together and enlighten ourselves a little bit, our hearts, our minds. Today we're going to be having a lecture about the experience of Paul of Tarsus in Athens. Is that correct? And so probably a little piece of his pilgrimage around Europe and Middle East at the time. But as always, before we start our lecture, we're going to have our initial reading and our prayer by Juliana, and then right after we're going to have our lecture by Rafael. Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to read a message from Happy Life, and Joanna de Artes. If one of your projects has failed, don't get upset or give up. Apparent failures are the means by which God leads you to correct your approach, enabling you to repeat the experience of the wiser. A person who refuses to try again on account of a past failure doesn't deserve to enjoy the sweet taste of success. The art of starting over is the measure of greatness for those who aspire to even greater accomplishments. No one enjoys victory without having experienced previous defeats. Life is a succession of lessons that must be repeated until properly learned. So at this moment, I invite all of you to close your eyes, to connect your hearts with our Master Jesus. And we are very thankful and grateful to be able to be here at this place this morning, where we learn together, where we experience together. And by having this time here, where we are inspired by the lectures, we can understand a little bit more on how to improve on our inner transformation. We thank our Master and all the good spirits who join us at this time. And we ask to bless our speaker today, Rafael, so that we can leave this place learning a little bit more on what we can do to improve ourselves. Thank you so much, and be with us.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, those who are watching us through the internet. As always, it's very special for me to be here, to have this opportunity to share victories and defeats, and especially the impact that this marvelous doctrine that the Spiritism have in our lives. This doctrine that gives us a meaning. It guides our steps in our incarnation and makes our sufferings and difficulties bearable. It doesn't take away our pain, because it's not supposed to. Pain is there for a reason. It's there for us to learn and to see what has to be changed. But with what we get from Spiritism, we can bear that pain. And sometimes joyfully. We really understand. So the idea today is to talk about Paul of Tarsus a little bit, because it's a very he did so much and he still does so much that we can spend a whole year just lectures about Paul of Tarsus. So what I'm going to do is to take one of his experiences, only one of them, his experience in Athens, and comment about that and see what we can learn from what he experienced, what he went through when he went to Athens. So Paul of Tarsus was a missionary, he is a missionary chosen by Jesus, straight from Jesus. And he came to earth with the mission to spread Christianism, to spread the teachings of Jesus. His mission is so important that his letters, the letters that he wrote, inspired directly by Jesus, they contain teachings that will be true forever. They are eternal because they talk about the law of God. The problem is that those lectures, they were written in a particular space, in a particular point in our history, involved in a culture, the Jewish culture. And he wrote for the men and women of that time. So for almost 20 centuries, the teachings of Paul's letters was encoded. We could not grasp exactly what he was talking about. With Spiritism, and especially with the Spirit, who we'll see later, knew Paul of Tarsus in person, the Spirit of Emmanuel. We needed to wait for him to come to us and unveil everything that is all the teachings that we can take, the teachings from Jesus that we can take out of his lectures. So it's a subject that requires a lot of study, and there is one guy, I think most of you guys know him, Haroldo Dutra Dias. So he came here once, and he studied Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, and he has been deciphering the letters under the light of Spiritism, studying Emmanuel. And there's this book here, 7 Minutes with Emmanuel. It's a new book, and it's an amazing book from Haroldo Dutra Dias. And he explains several of Paul's lectures and other parts of the Bible. So this is one of the books that I use as reference for the study that we're going to see today. Well, let's get into it. So Paul was first introduced to us as Saul. So his name from birth was Saul. Saul of Tarsus. Tarsus because that was the city that he was born. And he's introduced to us first in this book, Paul and Stephen, in chapter 4, in the year 35 AD. So it's a little after when Jesus went back to the spiritual plane. And we see that at that time, Paul was, or Saul, he was 30 years old, and he was very athletic. He was a sports guy. And he was already a rabbi. This means he was a leader of the Jewish culture. He was a very, very intelligent man. And he had this drive, I need to spread the law of Moses. And he had that strength in him. And he had all the package, the intelligence and the logic to support it. So he had everything. He remembered that he is a missionary chosen by Jesus. At that point, he just didn't remember that yet. He didn't remember. But during this chapter, when he's talking to a friend, he already expresses the will to go and spread the law of Moses, which is what he thought was what everybody needed to know. He expressed the will to go to Athens and Rome. He had been educated in Athens. And so much so that he preferred to speak Greek. So this will be the equivalent of living in Brazil and then you send your son or your daughter to study in Harvard or University of Toronto, and then your son or daughter return to Brazil, but then they prefer to speak English. Such as the impact of the education that they had abroad. So that they see all those marvelous discoveries in that culture, and remember that at that time the world was not so much connected. So you could have two cities 200 kilometers apart with two completely different cultures, because it's not so easy to go from one place to the next. And the interface with people was harder than it is today. We didn't have cars, we didn't have internet. So the change, it's much more drastic than it is today. So when Paul when he went to Athens and he studied with the biggest minds of that time, the impact was so big in him that he embraced that, and he made it his own. He appropriated himself from that culture. So then he preferred to speak Greek. So with his friend, he was actually speaking Greek, which is not his birth language. But that's what he preferred to speak at that time. And then we need to understand why is it that he was born in the Jewish culture? Why is it that since he was a missionary from Jesus, so his mission since the beginning was to spread Christianism. At that point, he just didn't remember. But the Jewish culture was the chosen culture for Christianism to be born, because they already knew that there was a God, and they already believed in life after death. So this is something that we're going to refer to in a few moments. Even Kardec, when he writes the Spirit's book and the Medium's book, he tells us that if you want to talk to someone about Spiritism, if you want to tell them the truth about the afterlife and the existence of spirits, there are some requirements that that person needs to have in order for you to start a conversation. And one of them is the person needs to believe in God. That's the first one. If the person doesn't even have that, there's really no point. There's really no point. And we have to respect it. We have to respect. As we are respected and we want to be respected in our opinions, we need to respect. We don't force. Jesus never forces himself. He never forced anyone to accept what he was teaching. He never did that. He plants the seed, and then he waits for that to grow. And he knows that it will grow. It can take several centuries, but it doesn't matter. It's God's time. It's not man's time. It's not the time of one life. Time of one life in the in immortal spirit is very small. It's nothing. It takes several lives. In the book Revelation, studying the book Revelation, we see that one day for God, it's 1,000 years. So this is also in the Spirit's book. So when Kardec asks, what is time for the spirits? And they say one day is, so they repeat, one day is 1,000 years. So Jesus actually, he waited 2 days. 2 days for his teachings to start growing. 2,000 years. So this gives us an understanding of how they see time. It's not how we see. But anyway, so Paul, he came as a Jew. So he dominated everything, he knew everything about the Jewish culture, so he was ready. But he was not a perfect spirit. He was not a perfect spirit in any way. He had the drive, he had the logic, he had the intelligence, and he had the heart. But he was not a perfect spirit. So the pride that was very common at that time between the rabbis and the Jewish culture, it contaminated him, and he became proud. So at that moment he lost his compass, and he was the first one to start persecuting Christians. So the name of the book is Paul and Stephen. Stephen was the first Christian ever to be killed in the name of Jesus, and he was killed by Paul. And after a while, if you read the book, you'll see that Stephen actually, as a spirit, he became Paul's mentor. So it's very interesting how the Jesus plan works. It's not about vengeance. It's about transformation of everybody. Everybody. The one who kills and the one who is killed. So by being the faith that Stephen showed when he was killed changed the guy who was killing, the persecutor. It changes something in Paul. It didn't convert Paul because Paul was, he just lost his compass. He knew already what was the right path. He was just lost. So when he was going to Damascus, we all know the story. He was converted when he was going to Damascus. He was, when we read the book, he was already thinking all those things. He was already remembering Stephen saying, how come that guy, that he follows a carpenter, how come he has so much peace? A peace that I have been looking for all my life and I never found it. How come my fiancé followed the same carpenter? So this guy, this carpenter, is dead, and he's following me. Everywhere I go, this guy is there. All those things were going through his mind when Jesus finally appeared to him, just for him, and he became blind. And the interesting thing is, when Jesus appeared to him and asked him, "So, why do you persecute me?" At that moment, he remembered. He was not transformed. He just remembered. He was converted, so that he was going this way, and his compass was straightened. He just remembered the right path. So that he doesn't argue with Jesus. He doesn't say anything but, "Lord, what would you have me do?" That's all he says. "What do you want me to do?" So he understood. From that moment on, he understood what he had to do. So nobody can change from one moment to the next like that. That's because he already knew. He just needed to be reminded. And then he becomes blind, and he doesn't say anything. And then the two helpers that were taking him to Damascus, they were thinking, this guy went crazy with the sun, the desert. And when they take him to Damascus, he says, "Okay, now you guys can go on with your lives. You can leave me here, because my life does not belong to me anymore." So this shows he knows his mission now. He remembers now. He appropriates himself from what he needed to do. So he knows. He's not supposed to live his life on his own desires. So he came to do a job, and he has to do that job. So he lives from that moment on. He lives for Jesus' plan. It's not his life. It's Jesus' life. So much so that along the way he says, "It's not me who lives anymore. It's Jesus who is living in me. Everything I do is for him." And he says that with extreme joy. So this book is one of the most important books if we want to understand how was the primitive Christianism, how Jesus was spreading his message in the very beginning, before all the filters and all the politics and everything that happened in between. So then, we cannot go through the whole story. It's very vast, full of stories and teachings. So let's fast forward to chapter 8. In chapter 8, now Paul, Saul is not Saul anymore. Now he adopted the name of Paul because he's changed. Now he's a Christian. And he's in his late 50s, around 58. So 58 at that time was very old. So he's an old man now. Even more so because all the sufferings that he went through, so everything is white. It's prematurely white. His hair, his beard. And he is on his way to Antioch. Antioch is where Turkey is today. And the city is Antakya. Antakya is the city that we have today, is the place where Antioch and the team of Paul was. And he is on a second journey. He already went through that way. Now he's visiting. He's going back to the churches that he had already funded in all those places. So he's just going back. And but now this time he's gathering money for the church of Jerusalem, because Peter is there in Jerusalem, And since this is the heart of the Jewish culture, it's a very persecuted, it's a very hard place to be, to create a church. So he wanted to save money to give to Peter and say, okay, now you are free. You don't have to take money from anybody else. So you are independent. That's what he wanted to do. So he was going back and taking money, donations. And he noticed something. There's no violence against him anymore. So he goes to the city and everybody is his friend. Even those who in the first time persecuted him, he had been tortured and beaten up and whipped so many times that he could not stand up straight. So imagine this, he was always walking around, and more often than not, he was living on wild berries in the road. So he was living out of what he could find. So eat small berries or fruits or what they had in the road. So he was a very thin guy. And so if you guys understand that every time that we have a wound and then we form a scar, the tissue that it forms there is not the same. It doesn't have the same elasticity. So this guy he was all cuts. His hands and his face is all cuts. And especially at the back, because he had been whipped so many times. So he could not stand up straight. And Emmanuel tells us that he had a funny way of standing up, maybe a little crooked, because his back is just scars, right? And but he doesn't shy away. He continues, as he said, "It's not my life; it's Jesus' plan. I'm living for Jesus." So he keeps going. It doesn't matter if I'm going to be beaten up again. It doesn't matter, really. I don't care. But then when he gets there, he's well received everywhere. He has a lot of friends. Nobody argues with him. And he realized, my job here is done. So the churches are prospering. And even those who threw rocks at me, now they are receiving me and wanted to talk about Jesus. And then he starts thinking, okay, what's the next step? So this part here is done. And then he has a dream about the Macedonian guy. A Macedonian guy doing like this. Come and help us. How does he know it's a Macedonian guy? Because as I said, the cultures were completely different, so the clothes were different. So in Macedon, they would dress in a particular way. They would wear belts and earrings or whatever, tattoos in a different way. So he recognized, okay, it's Macedon. And then he understands that now is the time for him to follow an old dream to go to Athens, to go to Greece. But this time is not to spread the law of Moses, but to spread Christianism. They called at that time Christianism because of Luke. Luke was the first that proposed it. So if you guys are following Christ, so why don't you adopt the name Christianism? So at that time they already called themselves Christians. So then he decides to go to Greece. And he had two companions. We study Paul and his lessons, but those guys, they relied on friends. They were never alone. They all had a lot of friends. And that was very special for them. So Paul, he was walking with Timothy and Silas. And when he wakes up and he goes and talks to them, we need to go to Greece. And everybody respected him because of his life, the way he lives his life, and they knew he had done some amazing things. So people knew that what he said was inspired and it needed to be respected. This was before he started writing the epistles, the letters. So then they respect him, but they are worried because they don't have anything. They don't have any money. They don't have nothing. So how come we have to go from Turkey to Greece? How can we go there? You need to cross Black Sea. I think the name is Hellespont, where the city of Troy was, and the Iliad was written. So you have to cross that sea to go to Greece, and you need money for that. So they were really worried, but Paul said, as I said before, it's not my life, it's Jesus. It's Jesus' plan. So He will provide. In the same way that your boss comes today and says, yeah, we need you to go to China. You don't think, I don't have money to pay for the trip to China. The company is going to pay. I'm going to send you there. So it's the same thing. So Paul knew something would happen to give them the opportunity to go to Greece. The next day, they were walking around the city, and who they see in the market looking around? Luke was there. And they get very happy because remember, they were all very good friends. So he goes there, he embraces Luke, and he talks about his plan, and Luke says, oh, but this, I'm going there right now. So I'm a doctor. Well, they knew already that he was a doctor. So he was working in a ship. And he was the doctor of the ship. So he was hired by the captain. And he said, don't worry about money, I'll pay for everything. So you guys just come with me and we'll go to Greece. And they're all very happy now. There are 4 guys. And so they have a very nice trip. Of course, Paul takes the opportunity to talk about Jesus, and everybody likes it. And then he asks Luke he tells Luke, listen man, I know you're a very good guy, and you are a Christian, or you propose the name yourself. And why don't you follow me full time? Why don't we become partners and just work for Jesus' plan? And then Luke said, yeah, but I'm a doctor. So actually, Luke, when Paul says that, he feels something inside. He feels really excited, but his material mind still struggles. So he said, but I'm a doctor, I have my profession, and this is important. And Paul says, yeah, I know, being a doctor is really important. But you have something else that other people don't do. You understand the spiritual life. One day, so this is his mind, 2,000 years ago, one day when we understand how the Spirit works, nobody is ever going to get sick. Because the body responds to the Spirit. So take a moment and understand that this is something that today we are talking about and we are trying to understand, and Paul already understood 2,000 years ago. So then he says that to Luke, because what he meant was leave this profession, the material doctor, for those who don't understand that yet. You do understand, so come with me. So Luke accepted very happily, and then they got to Greece and they separated. They all went. So he went with Silas, and Luke went with Timothy. And then he started spreading, going in small cities. And he was beaten up again. He was tortured. There were people who argued with him. But again, in every city, he founded a church. There was, when I say a church, is one person that accepts to copy some parts of the Levi's notes, the Matthew gospel that Paul was always carrying with him, and start reading gospel at home. The first church is a gospel at home. It's just a family that would accept to do gospel at home and invite those who wanted to do it together. Those are the churches that Paul founded. It's just one person. Sometimes a group, sometimes more. And then after he did that, then the Jews they started to get very, very angry with him, persecuting him. So they said, okay, so it's time for me to go. So then he left the city. So every city was kind of the same pattern. A few changes here and there. And then he continues. And finally he reached Athens. But at that time he is on his own. For several reasons, the other guys, they went in different ways. And Paul, he entered the city on his own. So imagine that is the city where he was educated, and it was really, really special for him. Really special. So he was very happy. Finally here, after 28 years, finally here. And then he looks at the monuments and the statues, and he's smiling, very happy. But he's walking on his way, like all crooked. And the people of Athens are looking at him, and they see like a beggar. So he doesn't see that. He was so happy that he doesn't see that. He doesn't even care. So he's just too happy to be there. And then he decides, okay, now I need to start. Where do I start? So he goes to a public place, And he started preaching. That's what he always did. But then, this time, something that never happened before happens. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. No stoning. Nobody goes there and punch him. Nobody whips him. Nobody does anything. Nobody argues with him. People just don't care. So then there's nothing to work with. If someone argues with you, at least that person is paying attention to you. There's something to do there. Even if that person will go and disagree, but they will remember you. If nobody cares, there's nothing to do. And then he's very frustrated. Like, oh my God, this never happened to me before. He never left a city without founding a church. And then he decided to go. He remembers this place, Areopagus, which is like the highest council. Is a place where the most intelligent men of Athens, they would join and discuss scientific or philosophic issues. It's like going to UFT there and then in the middle of a conference and grab the phone and then the microphone. That's what he did. Remember that he had contacts. He was a guy that had been educated there. So he knew how to get there. He knew who to ask to give him a space to talk. And he goes there. And he started talking about Jesus. And first, when he started talking about the law of Moses and the logic, people started paying attention to him. And then he started talking about life after death and the spirits. And then people just start laughing. Nobody got angry at him. They did not get angry at him. They just didn't care. So he was found with laugh, sarcasm, disdain, and indifference. And then at that moment, he understood why he started the Jewish culture. Because there, even with them being angry at him, there was always a church. There was always someone, could be 100 people, and 99 were against him. But there was one who said, no, I think what you're saying makes sense. I want to read your notes from Levi, and I want to study them. In Athens, there was no one, nobody. And he's very frustrated. And then he remembered Jesus saying that it's better to preach for those who are poor in spirit, those who are humble, those who suffer, because those, they are seeking something. When we feel pain, all our shields, our pride, it goes away. It goes away because you need help. Your pride goes only so much. After that, you get desperate and I need help. And at that point, you open your heart. That's the problem, is when we close our hearts to the world. So when Jesus referred to the poor in spirit, he was referring for those who had their hearts open by life itself. And he understood that. And at this point, Emmanuel, the spirit who wrote the book, he describes the culture of Athens as beautiful and well cared for, but cold with the stiffness of intellectual death. Stiffness of intellectual death. What does he mean by intellectual death? So it's something very, very interesting that happens to us. We research something and we get success on that something, and then we stop looking to the sides. We see only one way. Like we apply science and we apply the scientific method and we see, oh man, this is amazing, it works. And then we think that everything else, if it's not explained by that method, it's not true. It's not true. So this happens to this day. It's not news. We have been doing that for more than 20 centuries. And we still do it today. In the book, The Way, the Truth, and the Life, the same spirit, Emmanuel, It tells us, in religion and science, which are the sacred organizations of universal progress, sacred organizations, science and religion, they, the evil spirits, answer to the names of pride, vanity, dogmatism, and sectarian intolerance. So what drives us to have this intellectual death? Pride and vanity. Science is as important as religion. Both of them. So they are the sacred organizations for universal progress. So we need them. We need them. Both of them are important. But the pride and vanity from their philosophy closed Athenians' hearts and made them blind to the primary cause of everything. They could see the beauty, but they could not understand, or they closed their minds to understand why that was beauty, why that was pretty. They could see nature, and they were starting to understand the laws of nature, but why does that work like that? Why is there beauty in the first place? What is the primary cause of all that? They just saw one side and they forgot everything else. To have I brought an example, a very current example from that. There's a scientist that I admire, Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking, he discarnated last year, and this is his last book, Brief Answers to Big Questions. So this book was published by his children. So he discarnated before the book was published, but it was already ready. And in this book, he answers several questions. And the first chapter is there a God? Is there a God? And those guys, they are really smart. We should not underestimate, this guy didn't understand this or didn't understand. He understood a lot of things. A lot of things. He was a cosmologist. So he was the guy who created Hawking radiation, the theory that explains why black holes, they are not that black. Why do they shine? They emanate Hawking radiation. It's his PhD theory. So a very smart guy. He spent his life studying the universe. And it's not like we sit with them and say, no, man, this is what you're saying is all wrong, is this, and that. It's not that simple. Not that simple. So I'm going to read the last paragraph, only the last paragraph, for us to understand a little bit of what he was thinking. Do I have faith? We are each free to believe what we want. And it's my view that the simplest explanation is that there is no God. This leads me to a profound realization. There is probably no heaven and afterlife either. I think belief in an afterlife is just wishful thinking. There is no reliable evidence for it, and it flies in the face of everything we know in science. I think that when we die, we return to dust, but there's a sense in which we live on in our influence, in our genes that we pass on to our children. We have this one life to appreciate the grand design of the universe, and for that I am extremely grateful. He was this very smart guy, but he had the same problem of the Athenians. This intellectual death. His heart was closed. He says that he's grateful. Grateful to whom? Grateful to whom? How can you be grateful if all you see is equations in a paper? How could he miss the point so much? He says that there is no evidence. Man, we have an incredible work for Kardec was the guy who studied this the most, but he was not the only one. There's evidence all over, but you need to do your part. You need to do your part. You need to seek for it. You need to read it. You need to study to understand it, to open your heart. But he didn't do that. I'm sure that he was a very good person. And I'm sure that whatever he is, he's reviewing these concepts. Because now he cannot deny he's there. He cannot deny. So we can, science is very important. It's very important. Now that we know the laws of gravity, or the three laws from Newton, and we know how the heavenly, they used to call the heavenly bodies, and now we call planets, how they work, and we know that we can predict that planet will be here, and then after a few weeks that planet is there exactly where it was predicted. We cannot deny that science is important. But we cannot explain everything with science. We cannot explain everything with the scientific method. Now we see that we have a lot of mothers here, that are babies. So, if we take just a scientific point, they would say the love that you feel for your baby, it's a consequence of this and that hormonal process, a chemical process that happens in your brain. We know that that's not true. We know. How do we know? That there is something else that tells us. That's what we need to respect. That's why we need to respect other people's opinions, because sometimes those people, they didn't get to that point yet. They didn't get to that point and to realize that there's something else. Because this something else that we bring comes from before. It comes from a long time, several incarnations that we took to understand this something else. In that, I have a particular experience because when I learned about Spiritism the first time, I was 18 years old, and it was at the same year that I started college. So I learned Spiritism and science together. I was going to the courses, physics and chemistry, and their applications, engineering, and at the same time I was going to the Spiritist Center and the youth, Gospel for Youth. And I was learning about Spiritism, and I was mesmerized. I loved it. And to me, those two was always connected, science and Spiritism. It was never apart. What I was learning in the Spiritist Center, then I went to college. Oh my God, this is the same thing. It's amazing. And then, since, of course, I was immature, I was a teenager, I wanted to talk to everybody about Spiritism and convince everybody, and I thought I could convince people using science. Because in my head, it was so clear, the connection, that I thought everybody else could see it. But then I understood it doesn't matter how many equations and logic I send, people say that, no, I don't see it. I don't see it. Then I understood that Spiritism is not science. It's so much more. Science is a method that we created as men and women. So it's as incarnate beings, we created here on earth. Spiritism did not come from here. Spiritism comes from the spirits. From the spirits who are no longer connected to this planet. So they have another view. One day, maybe our science will get there, but it is not today. Then I understood we can use science to understand some points of Spiritism and to strengthen our faith. But we cannot say that Spiritism is science. So when we read Kardec's books and Emmanuel and André Luiz, we see that they use a lot of science. Of course, science as Emmanuel said, is a sacred organization, so we have to use it. It's part of the way our mind works. We have to use it. So we can, when we talk here about obsession, we talk about electromagnetism, our thoughts and resonance and tuning and this and that. This is all science. We could not talk about that without Maxwell's equations. Or the first time we learned about fields and electromagnetism. This was 1864. So after Spiritist book was created. So that's why Kardec doesn't talk about electromagnetism. He talks about electricity and magnetism, because it was before. When we have André Luiz books, that he already talks about electromagnetism. He uses our science. So there's no problem. The problem is to take electromagnetism and say that that is Spiritism. No, it's the other way around. And why do we believe in all that? There's something else, life. It creates a flame in us. We know that there's something there. We know that there is. How do we know? I don't know. This faith, it starts first. So that's why we need to respect. Some people haven't gotten there yet. And it's their right, as is our right to be here. There's a lot of things that we don't understand. A lot of things that we don't understand. And the spirits, they respect us. They give us time. They come and they give a little bit, one by one. Oh, and then another thing that we have to be careful. We go in the other way. We start taking theories like quantum mechanics, quantum electrodynamics, or put those two together and call it quantum physics, general relativity, special relativity, and then we start saying, oh, but those theories, they explain reincarnation. Oh, they explain why there are colonies. Guys, they don't. They don't. This is mysticism. We do that. We create mysticism. Now, it's just like it's a fashion. We see quantum this, quantum that, quantum here, quantum there. And then quantum mechanics, it's a theory that helps us to calculate where a particle is. And what is the properties of that particle. That's it. Quantum electrodynamics, it tells us what happens to that particle when it goes into an electromagnetic field. That's it. There's no reincarnation there. Actually, that's forbidden. It's forbidden to ask. They call this irrelevant questions. So you're trying to see, is there a particle here? Or what is the chance to find a particle here? Oh, but what about reincarnation? Man, I'm trying to figure out if there's a particle here. Why are you talking about reincarnation? It's not relevant. It's not relevant to calculate where the particle is. That's our problem. That's our science. That's our science. So to use those names and those theories to say that they explain, it's mysticism. They don't. They don't. What we can use, what we can do, and we should, it's, during this process we learned that the universe is randomic, and we cannot tell where this is and where this isn't. We can only tell an average of probabilistic waves. You say, oh my God, this blows my mind. So this is gold. Then we read André Luiz books, and he said, André Luiz goes there and he says something that is exactly in accordance to what we read. That is very good. We can extrapolate science. We can extrapolate and make our own minds. But then I cannot say that the decision, the opinions that I formed, or my views, or how much more I understand Spiritism because of that theory, is that theory. I hope that this is I can make myself clear. But I mean, in the introduction of Spirit's book, the first thing that Kardec says is the importance of calling things by their proper names. Things by their proper names. Spiritism. Those theories or physics, it's physics or biology or chemistry. We can use one to explain the other, but let's use the proper names. Okay? So we can go in either way. We can not accept at all, or we can accept too much without seeing, without thinking. So we all have to, I want to try to understand and see what we can use to strengthen our faith. But I want to go back to Paul. So we see him in Athens going through all this situation, that his first failure, and he's really, really sad. Really, really sad. He thinks that he failed Jesus. So in his mind is, oh my God. Literally. So then the first thing he does, he goes back to visit one of his churches in Antioch. Corinth, very close to Athens. Why? Because those are his friends. He was feeling bad. What does he do? He go talk to his friends. But it's the importance of friendship, the importance of sharing love, of being together, because that's how we were created. We don't have to face things by ourselves, and we should not, if we are sad, we should not isolate ourselves. We should do the opposite. Talk to our friends, talk to our family. Open our hearts. Sometimes people make bad use of that, but that's a small probability. Like, if you see the amount of people that, after you open yourself, the people that use that to harm you, it's so small. And the amount of friends that you do because you did that is much, much bigger. So we need to concentrate on what is good. So he goes there, and then he gathers his strength again, and he continues again. So then he keeps going. He forgets about Athens, and okay, let me concentrate on where he's working. I'm going to respect their time. One day they're going to understand. So then he continues, and then he does some, maybe 1 or 2 years later, he goes to Rome. Then you remember that was part of his dream. His dream was Athens and Rome. Athens, the culture, the center, the cultural center, and Rome because it was the center of the empire. So he went to Rome, and that's very interesting. When he goes to Rome in the year 63 AD, it's his last trip because he's decapitated there. So he's discarnated there. He never comes out of Rome. But when he's walking the street with his friends, there is a state car with horses, and inside of this car, it's a senator, a Roman senator, and his name is Publius Lentulus. That most of us know. It's Emmanuel, one of the incarnations of Emmanuel. So then there's something wrong with the car, and they have to stop the car, and the senator comes out, and he sees Paul. And for some reason they start talking. And at that moment, who knows the story of the senator, 2,000 years later, another book, he actually met Jesus in person. He met Jesus. But he was too proud. He was not ready yet. So he does not accept. He thinks that Jesus is just a magician because he kneels in front of Jesus. He didn't understand what he did. Where that power was coming from, that he cried and so this guy just hypnotized me or whatever. So then he talks to Paul, and at that moment he was in a crossroads of his life because he had suffered a lot. This is a long time, so it's 63 AD, so it's 30 years after Jesus. And his wife, Livia, had just died in the Circus Maximus in the name of Jesus. So it's again another guy that's surrounded by Jesus everywhere. And then when he talks to Paul, Paul triggers in him a change. Triggers a change. So much so that he goes back home and he says, Jesus of Nazareth, I had to lose the best and dearest of all my treasures to remember the rightness and sweetness of your words. I do not yet understand your cross, and I still do not know how to accept your humility within my sincerity as a man. So he understood that there's something there. There's a light in this carpenter after all, but I still do not understand it. So this senator, Publius Lentulus, a few years later, he discarnated in Pompeii when the Vesuvius he erupted, and he's there. So he dies there. But the thing is, Paul never forgot the senator. So Paul received the senator and became his mentor. So this senator, he came back 15 centuries later. Why is this not going? Sorry, technical problems. Yeah, okay. So he comes back 15 centuries later. Now he has another name. He's Manuel da Nóbrega. He's a priest, and he's together with the team to colonize Brazil. And his mission is to spread Christianism. He's spreading Christian. That senator that met Paul. And then he founded a city. Guess the name of the city? São Paulo. He founded a city. And then After that, we see him. This time, he comes back not with a body. He comes as a spirit, as a mentor himself. Now it's his time to be a mentor. He's mentor of the medium, Francisco Cândido Xavier, Chico Xavier. And then, this is amazing because it closes. He writes this book, Paul and Stephen. So he's writing what he learned from his mentor, who is Paul himself. This is in the book Amor e Sabedoria de Emmanuel. I don't think has been translated. So this came from Chico. Emmanuel told us this through Chico. So Paul, he never stopped. He's still to this day doing his work. He didn't stop with the failure that he saw in Athens. The fruit of his work is still growing, and he's still doing his job. So it's amazing that today we can read this book that was written by someone whose mentor was Paul himself. So that's why Emmanuel is the one who deciphers the letters of Paul. So that's why I think that Spiritism gives us this meaning of life. We can see the mission, we can see the work of a missionary after 2,000 years. It's still going. It's still going. And we see that we never know what will be the impact that will have in someone's life. Paul and Emmanuel, and the body of the senator, they met in 63 AD. And 2,000 years later, he was mentoring Chico Xavier, and he was writing not just this book, but all the amazing books that we have today that bring us so much consolation by the Spirit of Emmanuel. We never know. We never know how far our examples will be. So that's is the message. That we should always respect other people's opinion. We should not impose what we know and what we think. But we should never hide our light. What do I mean by that? If you have the opportunity, by all means, talk about it. Talk about it, and the opportunity will come. But then, there's some time where you have to shut your mouth and listen, because the other person will want to talk to you. And there's a lot to learn from other cultures. There is a lot to learn. Spiritism is this beautiful doctrine that gives this meaning and makes our pain tolerable, but it's not the only way. It's not the only way. There are people, I have a friend who is Muslim, and I had a lot of prejudice against Islamism. But then when I met this guy, it's all about inner transformation and being a better person every day and being in contact with God. And so I learned a lot. I learned a lot what is the meaning of jihad. I learned what is the meaning of his Ramadan. It's all about love. So this was always amazing. So that he would talk about Islamism, and I would talk about Spiritism. So it was an amazing exchange. And this could not happen if both of us had our pride shields up. And you say, no, that's completely wrong. What I'm saying is right, and then he would do the same thing, and we could not be friends anymore. And what is the main thing of life? It's people. It's people, always people. Everything else will decay, walls will fall, buildings will crumble. People are immortal. People are eternal. Friendship and family. Sometimes it's better to close our mouth and listen, even though sometimes we know that is wrong. The person is saying something that we don't agree. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The truth cannot be more important than the friendship or the love between those two people. This is something that probably should be taken to some countries where people are having politic discussions and they're killing themselves for it. People is always the most important thing. What was the mission of Paul? is to bring to the people the good news, to make people feel better. That is it, that was his mission, and that is our mission as human beings, to help each other, to spread the love, first develop the love inside of us and then spread. In our homes, in our families, sometimes it looks very small, but we never know. We never know what will be the impact of that small action that you do today. So that's my message today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Rafael, for a great lecture. I think we have a few minutes for any questions or comments from here or anybody from the internet. Let us know. Carlos knows the internet's quiet. Anybody has any questions, any comments? It's very inspiring and very interesting lecture. It's always good. I think I agree with you with Paul. We could stay here probably the whole year just talking about him. And about you, but for me it's always very, very special to talk about Paul of Tarsus, because you can literally find whole Christianity and everything that Jesus has taught us inside of his teachings, right? It's all in there. It's really amazing the work that he did doing his walks around and going everywhere without car.
Yeah, exactly.
Without his Nike shoes with the shock absorbent.
Just sandals.
Just sandals, right? And sometimes we complain because, and being beaten up, kicked, doing everything, right? So an amazing mission that he had so today we can actually understand a little bit more of Christianity and understand a little bit more with our failures and say, you test and you keep going as far as we following, the path of love and charity. We should never give up, no matter how many stones are thrown at us, right? Just keep going. So, thank you very much again. We are going to prepare for the passes. So I want to say goodbye to everybody that was with us over the internet and hope to see you next week again.